Hello and welcome to Practical Podcasting. My name is Rob O'Connor. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Computing and Mathematics at Waterford Institute of Technology. I work with a number of podcasts here in WIT, whether hosting them myself or producing them for other people or helping other staff members get some podcasts off the ground. I also have a background in radio. I've been presenting and producing a show, an Irish music radio show, since 2006. What I want to do in this series of videos is to try and distill down the really important things that you might need to know if you want to get your own podcast off the ground. So today we're going to start with step one, which is knowing your audience. Now, this is absolutely essential. If you don't know who you're trying to reach, how can you expect to produce material that's relevant for them? So what we're going to do is maybe just explore our audience for a moment. So the listener comes first. That is absolutely paramount. You've got to think about who you're trying to reach. Try and visualize them. Are you producing material for a technical audience? Or is it for professionals? Is it for students? Is it for children? Is it for a general audience? There's very different contexts in which somebody might listen. For example, if you're producing a podcast about maybe healthcare material, if it's for doctors and healthcare professionals, those will have different expectations as to the level of technical depth than, for example, a general audience or a non-professional audience. Equally, students would be maybe somewhere in the middle. So you've got to think, who is your audience? And if you know that, then you can prepare your material accordingly. An important thing to remember is that podcasting and radio is geared towards individual listening. You might have 20,000 listeners or 200,000 listeners or 200 listeners. It doesn't really matter. But what you've got is one listener multiple times. You don't have 20,000 listeners, you have one listener 20,000 times. And if you try to be all things to all people, you will fail. You cannot, it just can't be, unfortunately. You'll just end up falling between not just two stools, you'll fall between every stool. And your material will be too broad to be satisfactory for any one audience. So let me give you an example as to what I'm talking about. So The Machine is a podcast that I present and produce at WIT. It's a computer science education podcast that my colleagues and I work away on. The idea behind the podcast was to assist in student recruitment. So what we were trying to do is try to bring in extra students, particularly those who might not think that computing is for them. As a kind of a secondary goal with this podcast was maybe to produce some extra material that our own students might find useful. And then beyond that, it might be content that the general public might be interested in, but it's not really our goal to hit them. Our goal is to appeal to potential students. So you've got to think about that. Now, we're also talking computer science education. Okay, so in order to do that, then what we did was invent a sample listener, and I want to introduce you to Emma. Now, Emma doesn't exist, so it's important that you remember that. She's totally, she's a construct. So Emma in our construct is 22, and she lives in Wexford. So she lives nearby to WIT, but she doesn't live in Waterford. She's currently working as a sales assistant in a department store. She did reasonably well in secondary school. Like, she didn't do amazing, but she didn't do too poorly either. And she did go to college where she started a business and marketing course, but she dropped out because it really wasn't for her. She just kind of went on to college because it seemed like the thing to do, and she didn't get great advice from her guidance counsellor. It just, he or she was probably too busy. She's now thinking about going back to college because she doesn't really see much of a career for herself staying working in the department store. Now, she has a bit of background with technology. She loves video games, and particularly she's into those kind of farming type games, Stardew Valley and other Japanese style games. She has done a little bit of web development where she built a website for her basketball team, but she never really considered computing as a career option because it wasn't encouraged in her school. Also, she's not a mathematical genius, and she thinks that maybe you have to be in order to get ahead in computing. And also, she's a little bit worried about it being a boys' club, that maybe she'll stand out because she might be a girl and it just seems to be only boys who are interested in computing. But perhaps she's wrong. Now, so as I said, Emma does not exist. So she's just a construct. But there's a couple of things to note about her that are very, very important. So the first one is that she's female. So computing in WIT, much like computing in IT and engineering all across the world, there's a massive gender imbalance in that it is by far males outweigh females in the numbers taking courses and also working as professionals in the industry. So we're aiming at, again, potential students, and we're trying to aim at potential female students. She has an interest in computing, but she's not an expert. She likes playing some video games. She has done a little bit of web development, so she has, some interest in this area, but she doesn't know an awful lot about it. But that also means that she might want to learn more. And again, that helps us to inform our discussion. Also, you can see she's into sport because she plays basketball. She's not that male geek stereotype, which isn't really helpful for anyone. Also, she's a little bit nervous about mathematics, which again would be common amongst their students, that they're concerned that they have to be some sort of an Einstein in order to get ahead in IT, which isn't true at all. So how does that impact our discussions on the machine? So it informs, it means we always try to make sure that we have a mix of male and female voices on the panel. Now, we're very lucky here in that in our faculty there's a fairly even spread between the genders, so that's okay. So it's not a problem trying to get female voices into the studio. It also informs the technical level of our discussion. As I said, Emma is interested, but she's not an expert. So what that means is that if we're discussing something like computer programming, we might assume some surface knowledge, but if it gets anywhere down below that, I might bring back the conversation to make sure that a topic is, or a concept is explained before moving on. So a classic example of that is computing is full of acronyms. There's loads, for everything you can think of, there's an acronym for it. And again, I might forget that not everyone knows these acronyms. So in the conversations in our podcast, if somebody uses an acronym, I might stop them and ask them just to explain what that is. And that's a way that somebody like Emma might be able to feel part of the conversation and that it's not going over her head. Even though I know that, there's a concept there called informed naivety. And that's where you ask a question that you already know the answer to. And you're not asking for you, you're asking for the listener. And in this case, I'm asking for Emma. So the important thing there is that you're thinking about your audience. So before you do anything with respect to podcasting, try and identify who your audience is. That can be students. That's absolutely fine. So you're trying to produce material for your peers. That's absolutely fine. And that informs the level of complexity of the conversation. If you can be specific, do. It can be very, very useful. But just remember that if you try to be all things to all people, it just won't work. Hope you found that useful. We'll be delving into more areas for practical podcasting over the next few videos. So until then, good luck.